Hello and welcome to this very special episode of The Tea. I'm Myriam Francois and I am joined today by a very special guest. Hala Rharrit served, I should say, as Arabic language spokesperson for the State Department and as the Dubai Regional Media's Hub's Deputy Director. She served at the State Department for over 18 years and just recently resigned over Gaza. She was the first diplomat, in fact, to resign over Gaza and has represented the US government all over the world. So, Hala, first of all, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here with us. How are you feeling?
Thank you so much for having me.
So I should put cards on the table and say, Hala and I have known each other for a while. We were at Georgetown University together. And so we have a little bit of history, which is great. And I'm so proud to see that you took this incredible stance over events in Gaza. Can I just ask you from the outset, what it was like working as a diplomat representing the US government until this moment? Why was this the pivotal moment? Because there have been a fair few questionable US policies in the region. Why was it this one that you resigned over?
Absolutely. That's a very, very fair question. This was definitely not the first policy I had concerns with. What was different this time, Myriam, honestly, was the silencing, was the sidelining, and was the blatant violation of US law and the fact that the administration refused to shift any inch of the policy, despite every evidence coming out from the diplomatic corps. So throughout my 18 years, there were a lot of challenges, but it was an exhilarating job because I actually felt like I was contributing. And oftentimes I felt if my voice had not been in the room, it would not have been a great thing, right? And I had this sense of responsibility and I had this sense of service that it was my obligation to try to use my expertise, to try to use our academic background from Georgetown. We understood the history. I understood the region. And up until this time, that was always an asset for the State Department, to be quite frank. I may not have been able to shift every policy, but I was never silenced. And that's what changed this time, where I was specifically told to not share facts, to not spread accurate information about what was happening in Gaza. For me, that was unprecedented, and it was also unacceptable. And that's what eventually led to my resignation.
I mean, that's quite astounding what you're telling us, Hala. So you're saying that you presented factual reports, presumably from human rights organizations, experts who were saying what exactly, and what exactly were you then being told? Like, bury the report, or it's not true, or how were those conversations going?
Yeah. So I'll give some background to your audience. Diplomats have different specialties. So throughout my career, I was a political officer. I worked on political affairs, human rights, even counterterrorism. But my last role was a spokesperson. So that was the first public facing role. But as spokesperson, my job was also to monitor Arab media. So then after October 7th, I was tasked with monitoring pan-Arab media and reporting to Washington daily reports of what was happening in Gaza. Not just that, but also how US messaging was how it was being received, or lack thereof, throughout the Arab world. Were the talking points working? Were they not? You can imagine I was being very honest in saying none of the talking points are working. The policy is completely causing a backlash. So some people were welcoming of the information, I'll just say that, but a lot of others were not. And so, like any other job, bosses want to make their bosses look good. Does that make sense? Right? Nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news. And at the very basic human level, that's basically what it was with this. But the result was catastrophic because we're not talking about corporate America. We're not talking about a normal job. We're talking about a life and death situation, right? And when people are uncomfortable with the truth, when it comes to, we don't, the images, I used to put in the daily reports, all of the images of the children being bombarded and being pulled from the rubble. Everything that we were seeing on a daily basis, I was reporting it back to Washington until it made people feel uncomfortable, right? Because it was also showing US complicity. And I would document that US complicity, right? When there were images of fragments of US bomb, and they were undeniable. Because if it's coming from every single source out there, you can't really claim that it's fabricated, right? It's a bit undeniable. And little by little, I was silenced more and more each day, taken out of meetings because I was very vocal in terms of my concerns about the policy. Again, not because of my personal opinion, but because I saw what it was doing to America's credibility, to America's standing, that I considered it a threat to our own US national security. I can go on and on. But little by little, I was taken off of emails, I was taken out of meetings, everything that was my day job started being slowly taken away from me. And then I was eventually told in January my reports were no longer needed. And
Wow.
then again, I eventually decided that there is no way I could continue in the Foreign Service under these circumstances and under the illegality and the inhumanity of the policy. So obviously
And
decided to resign.
the irony of that is that you actually graduated from the School of Foreign Services at one of the most illustrious universities. So they
Yeah.
clearly lost an asset. I guess I want to ask you how you make sense of what was happening, because I think there's a lot of rumors, firstly, around what was and wasn't known internally. So you've said to us that you were putting forward reports showing injured children. So there was an awareness of the extensive civilian casualties, presumably the fact that 70% of these casualties were women and children, for example. There was also an awareness internally that the weapons being sold to Israel by the US were the weapons involved in that mass murder of civilians. That is correct.
Yes, yes.
So you're saying it's not in our interests, given what I'm seeing in the Arab world, for us to pursue this policy. The response to that is to cut you out and never to engage with you on that. Was there a conversation? Because I'm imagining maybe there was a conversation where they said, listen, Hala, we know what's up, but we've decided that there are bigger interests involved in this war, in this conflict, than the civilians of Gaza. Was that a conversation you were ever privy to? I mean, were you ever told what could rank higher in US interests than it not being complicit in potential war crimes?
I'll be very, very clear. It's politics. That's it. And this was a devastating part as a diplomat. I would have countless conversations with fellow diplomats. Diplomats know better, right? They're experts in their field, especially if you're dealing with diplomats that have served in the Middle East for a long time. And it was very difficult to find a diplomat. There were some, but it was generally difficult to find a diplomat that agreed with the policy. Okay, they would admit very much behind closed doors, this is a catastrophic policy. What are we doing? But the decision makers are at the political level. They were not the experts. They were not us as the diplomats. They were Blinken, Jake Sullivan, McGurk at the White House. Those were really the puppet masters of this policy. And that is also one of the reasons why I decided to resign, because I would speak to very senior diplomats that were absolutely powerless in the face of the political decisions being taken from Washington. No matter what evidence, no matter what facts, no matter what analysis we're providing, that is jeopardizing. In some places, there were some diplomats that were under threat, right? There was an ordered evacuation of our embassy in Baghdad. There were other issues in other countries that I really can't discuss, but it was a threat to us, but they did not care. Because the political elite were making these decisions based on their own calculations, not what was, I'll say, good for America.
And what were those calculations exactly, Hala? Let's get to the crunch of it. What were the calculations? Because of course, for those outside of those small rooms in which those conversations are happening, it's a dissonance that's difficult to make sense of. So
Yeah.
what was it?
Look, I'll boil it down. I'll boil it down to two things. I think, for one, you can't deny ideology, and Biden is a very open about the fact that he's a Zionist, right? Anthony Blinken is a Zionist. His family have long roots in Zionism. They truly, truly believe in the Zionist program and the agenda, and they want to implement it. But for me, the question was also, okay, but how? Even if you are convinced by the Zionist project, there are also different ways to do it, because fundamentally, this is also a threat to Israel's security, right? You can also argue that this is also disastrous for Israelis. It's causing generational cycle of violence for Israelis themselves. It's not keeping them secure in the long run. So there's another part that I really had a revelation, very clear revelation, was that there's profit in war. And I'm just going to be very blunt about that. I had countless meetings, including with members of Congress, where they would admit that we're in full violation of US law. There's no denying it with this policy, but that for various political considerations, they cannot vote against sending more arms. So everybody knows AIPAC and the influence of AIPAC. And it's been disastrous to our decision making, because politicians are taking decisions based on facts, analysis from their own intelligence community or diplomatic community, right? They're thinking, is this going to get me elected? Is this going to get me campaign contributions? So there's AIPAC, which is the obvious offender, but there's also the arms industry. And that does not get enough attention anywhere, really. They really fly under the radar. The arms industry has an intense lobby in Washington. And so when you have the arms industry combined with a pro-Israeli lobby, it's a very, very lethal combination. And there is no incentive for peace. And so what you have are political leaders telling you, we're working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire. In the meantime, they're pushing billions and billions and billions dollars more of weapons to Israel, because those weapons need to be used, so that more weapons need to be sold. It was a devastating realization for me as a diplomat to come to that realization, but unfortunately, that is the reality.
So it's interesting you say that, because I have long argued publicly that Israel is a money laundering outfit for America. And interestingly, when you consider what you've just said, which is essentially that despite public opinion having shifted over the course of the last 15 months in favor of, a peaceful resolution of this conflict for both Palestinians and Israelis, but of course we've seen a shift of sympathy towards Palestinians. It's unprecedented, right? Which has obviously been blamed on TikTok, but we can circle back to that. And simultaneously, so we have public opinion saying we want a ceasefire, public opinion saying we are outraged, Americans on the street saying we don't want our tax money going to this, senior diplomats and officials saying this is a security threat to our own country, this is not in our national interest, and then a cabal of small, powerful, predominantly men deciding a policy at odds with that. Have you had any I guess have you had any sort of moments of sort of feeling like the democracy that you signed up to serve may not be all you hoped it might be?
Well, yeah, isn't that sad? It was actually very, very, very devastating on so many levels, right? On so many levels. Obviously, the trauma of just watching what was unfolding in Gaza on a daily basis. Just no, human beings could not live like that, and other human beings should not have to watch the devastation of an entire population. Is just, I think we've all undergone a certain level of trauma over the last year and a half. And then obviously on the professional and personal front, just sort of all of these, I guess, things being shattered, right? All of these ideals being shattered. I really did, despite everything, despite all the horrors. And I know I was never, blinded to the facts of US history. We all know, we both went to Georgetown. We know all of the horror, but there's still this sense of, okay, well, I can make a difference, as naive as that may sound, right? But then when you realize, my goodness, there are such intense and powerful forces ensuring constant instability, and particularly constant instability in the Middle East, it really sobers you up, and you just, that's
Yeah.
why I'm speaking out loud right now.
No, and of course we appreciate it, and I can only imagine. I think all of us have had this fall from grace in various ways in our various industries over the last year. I'm a journalist. We have had our own awakenings in the industry over coverage, for example, and over more broadly a lack of solidarity towards our colleagues in Gaza. Which I still think, despite the pretenses that were those colleagues in Ukraine, we would be seeing a very different response to their murder, the murder of over 200 of them so far. I want to circle back to this idea of Christian Zionism, because we know that Christian Zionism, we know that it's something that has a massive influence. But at the same time, what I'm hearing from you on this is basically that the US politics is being guided by the religious views of a tiny minority of people. And I'm just confused about this, particularly as someone who, like you, works and has worked on the Middle East, where I'm aware that the US position has long been secular government, where religious ideology should have no influence on the way that politics is undertaken. So I'm confused. So, no Islam in politics over there because that's bad, but Christian Zionism, which isn't even the religious view of the majority of Americans, can guide US foreign policy?
Look, I think Christian Zionism is just used and manipulated to get people to favor the policy, to be quite frank. I think the politicians use it and manipulate it to their advantage. I think if it was not in their financial incentive to follow that ideology, that they wouldn't. Perhaps I've become a bit too cynical, but I think it's, raw greed and capitalism is really the driving force. And what underpins it is ideology. And another part of what underpins it is racism. And I think if there wasn't the profit and the incentive to do it, ideology would not be such a significant issue. But I think it's used and amplified in the United States to try to get support and to try to convince people that what's happening is okay when it clearly is not.
And what about, so I mean, because you obviously mentioned that Blinken and Biden are both Christian Zionists. So my understanding is that within secular democracies, I'm a Muslim. My personal faith has no bearing on the role that I take within politics. I certainly am not bringing my understanding of religion and seeking to impose it within mainstream politics, because pretty clear we shouldn't be doing that. But that's what is happening. Albeit that intersects clearly with greed, which is what you're saying about the arms industry. It seems as though American democracy, at least from where I'm standing, has been hijacked. I mean, it's interesting that Biden's departing speech referred to an oligarchy, right? To what extent do you today feel that the government that you were serving is less a democratic government and one run primarily for special interest groups?
Look, I'll just take it back to my childhood. Honestly, when I was being raised, and I'm the daughter of immigrant parents. I was always told by my parents, "America's so great." Ironic, the choice of words, right? But America's so great because it's not corrupt, right? And I think a lot of children of immigrants can relate to that, because a lot of people come from countries where the corruption is rampant. And they would always talk about, wow, there's transparency, there's rule of law, that's why we brought you here. There's no corruption. And it's been tragic to see that this democratic project has also succumbed to corruption. Citizens United was a major case that changed campaign finance laws in the United States. Your audience can Google it if they've never heard of it. But Citizens United really allowed dark money to get into politics in an unprecedented way. That really, really shifted how politics is run in the United States. And I think until we reverse that, until we get back to a place where There's transparency in campaign contributions. There's a cap in campaign contributions. You can't be a corporation and just decide to buy a politician. Then we are heading into very, very troubled waters. And we can see, even things like the wildfires, we see what happened. Why is California not functioning the way a state is supposed to function, right? The ramifications are so great in so many ways. But I hope that all of this somehow serves as a wake-up call and we get back on the right track somehow.
Can I ask you today, from where you're standing, with all these years of diplomacy, we've long been told that Israel is a key Western ally. Would it be fair to say that in our relationship with Israel, what was once maybe an asset is today actually a liability?
Absolutely, it's a liability, most specifically under Prime Minister Netanyahu and his extremist right-wing government, right, that are absolutely committed to ensuring there will be no peace, absolutely committed to ensuring there will be no two-state solution, all things that the American administrations have been at least articulating for years, right? But somehow this administration kept pandering to Netanyahu. Netanyahu has gotten us into so many wars, right? We can go into history, his influence on the Iraq War. He's still trying to get us into war with Iran. He tries to get us to fight his wars, and it's not in the interest of the American people. It's not in the geostrategic interest of the United States. It puts our relationships at risk with other Arab countries, and for that sake, 420 million Arabs around the region. And fundamentally, it's not even keeping Israel safe. Even if your focus is strictly the state of Israel, we see Israelis protesting every day against Netanyahu, including the families of the hostages. So absolutely, it's a liability, and we'll see. It'll be interesting to see the Trump personality and the Netanyahu personality and how they get along or not, perhaps.
Well, interesting you should bring up Trump, because of course we have in the last few days had this announcement of a ceasefire deal, and you definitely saw me use speech marks because I personally, having looked at the deal, do not consider it to be a ceasefire deal. I wish it was. I wish it was, Hala. Like, honestly, it makes me sad to describe it. But for me, it's a political prisoner deal. The phases 2 and 3 of the deal would be a ceasefire deal, but I'm not under the impression that there are any mechanisms built into the proposal that are likely to impose those phases 2 and 3. Unless, of course, President Trump decides to impose them. And from where I'm standing, looking at his choice of appointments on the Middle East, I'm not convinced that there is the will nor desire to impose them. So I just, very briefly, because we've only got about 2.5 minutes, what's your view on this deal and its incredible timing? Surely it's the stars aligning that it's just the day before the inauguration that it should come about.
Well, honestly, Myriam, I'm not going to believe it until I see it. We're already seeing press out of Israel saying that Netanyahu is changing the terms, and he's saying that they're not going to budge from the Philadelphia corridor. So before it's been even implemented, there's already talk that it's not going to be passed by the Knesset, which is absolutely devastating for the Palestinians, for the hostages. It's just a tragic situation. I can also say that if there was not a change in administration, I don't think we would have even gotten this much, even though it's not even right, because I think the administration would have just continued with their gaslighting of we're working tirelessly to get a ceasefire, but then never doing anything to actually achieve one. If you think that just last week, this administration tried to push through, or did push through Congress, trying to get $8 billion more in arms to Israel. You cannot say you're trying to get a ceasefire and at the same time send $8 billion more in arms. Those are absolutely contradictory actions. And the rhetoric is just that, just rhetoric. But then you have Trump coming in saying, all hell will break loose if I don't get a ceasefire by the inauguration. So here we have one, literally at the last minute. But the big question is this just a PR stunt? Is it just to say Trump did it, right, for the incoming administration, or is it going to last? Is it really going to last beyond the initial phase? I'm very worried. Like you, I want to believe that it's going to happen. I want to believe that the administration is going to use its leverage to finally put an end to this. But we really need more than just talk. That's it. We've had talk for the last year and a half from the Biden-Harris administration. We need action. We need a cut in arms in accordance with US law. We need real pressure. It's hard to see that happening, like you said, considering the nominees. But at the same time, I worked under a Trump administration in South Africa. He's an unpredictable character. For better or worse, he's an absolutely unpredictable character. So we'll see what's going to happen. But for all those involved, I'm just hoping that this is finally an end to all of the horrors that we've been watching for the last year and a half.
Absolutely. Just in 1 minute, Hala, if I can ask you, for all the people who are watching who have been taking to the streets, writing to their MPs or representatives, who have been in their day-to-day trying to do something to try and bring about this an actual ceasefire, an end to the mass killing, can I ask you, with your insider knowledge, what we could do more? What can your average person be doing more to try and influence what is going to happen? Because my fear is that the two-state solution is looking less and less likely by the day. And I'm really concerned about what's coming up. What would you recommend in 30 seconds or 40 if you want?
Thank you for that question. It's a very critical one. I'll just say use your voice. Your voice matters more than you realize. And one epiphany that I had this year is how did slavery happen for so long? Because good people stayed quiet. Good people stayed quiet. When atrocities happen in the world, no matter how minimal you think your role is, speak out. Speak out. Every voice matters. Every action matters. And don't be shy to do it. And just keep on fighting for justice, for people's humanity, and every little bit counts. So just use your voice.
Hala, I want to say a huge thank you to you for joining us on this episode of The Tea, this very special episode. And I want to thank you for using your voice to speak up for justice and human rights in this world. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Myriam. Really happy to be with you.